After slavery was prohibited in 1865, formerly enslaved people in America were granted full citizenship, the right to vote, and under the 14th Amendment, protection from racial violence. Formerly enslaved people were promised land and opportunity, but most got nothing because America quickly devolved into an era of racial terrorism and oppression for black citizens. White people in the South were angry that people formerly considered property were now equal citizens. Many turned to violence. In the years immediately following the Civil War, thousands of black people were murdered when they tried to claim their rights. Soon afterwards, federal troops were withdrawn from the South, ending a brief period of racial progress known as Reconstruction. Nationwide resistance to racial equality resulted in the reestablishment of racial subordination through biased laws, disenfranchisement, and terrorism, most dramatically enforced through lynchings. Racial terror lynchings of black people defined a shameful era in America. These lynchings differed from the hanging of white people in places where there was no functioning criminal justice system. Racial terror lynchings were directed at all black people. They enforced compliance with racial hierarchy and white supremacy, and ensured racial segregation and denial of equal rights. In 1916, in Cedar Bluff, Mississippi, a young black man named Jeff Brown accidentally bumped into a white woman while running to catch a train. A white mob stopped him and lynched him, beating him and then hanging him from a tree for his insolence and carelessness. His public murder was not about criminal punishment, but was instead about maintaining racial hierarchy and terrorizing the black community. White town residents proudly sold photographs of Mr. Brown's brutalized body hanging from the tree for 5 cents each. The Equal Justice Initiative has documented thousands of racial terror lynchings between 1877 and 1950. EJI has confirmed the lynchings of over 4,000 black people who were tortured, maimed, beaten, shot, hung, and burned alive by crowds of white people, often with the cooperation of law enforcement or government officials. The terror of lynching was so widespread that millions of black people fled the South and settled in the urban North and West as refugees of American terror, shaping the current demographic geography of the United States. On July 5, 1933, an older black woman named Elizabeth Lawrence reprimanded a group of white children who threw rocks at her as she walked home from work. Word spread that a black woman had dared to rebuke white children, and that night an angry mob of white citizens lynched Ms. Lawrence for her audacity. Her home was then burned to the ground. Her son, Alexander, fled to Boston. Racial terror lynchings often had the atmosphere of carnivals, with food vendors and souvenir stands. Hundreds or thousands of white people would often gather to watch and take part in the torture and murder of black citizens. There has been no effort in America to confront this legacy of racial terror. While hundreds of Confederate monuments litter the landscape in southern states, there has been no public recognition of the violence endured by black people. On October 7, 1910, a white mob in Montgomery, Alabama tried to abduct and lynch black men being held in jail on suspicion of miscegenation, or interracial sexual relations. When they were unable to get the men out of the jail, the frustrated mob lynched a black taxi driver named John Dell, who was sitting in his cab nearby. No one was ever arrested or prosecuted for his murder. EJI's Community Remembrance Project collects soil from the many sites where terror lynchings occurred. Jars labeled with the names of murdered black citizens are on public display at EJI, a powerful visual reminder of history we must face. EJI is working to create a permanent memorial to honor victims of lynching, a place to reflect on America's history of racial violence. We hope to place historical markers at hundreds of lynching sites around the country. Contemporary issues like police violence, excessive punishment in the criminal justice system, and even harsh and punitive treatment of children of color in schools and on streets cannot be understood without a deeper examination into our history of racial violence. More truthful discourse and reflection on our history of racial injustice is essential for us to achieve racial equity. Confronting the legacy of lynching is critical to advancing this conversation. We hope you will join our effort to help towns, cities, and states confront and recover from these tragic histories of racial violence through truth and reconciliation, where there can truly be equal justice.
After a man was found dead with a rope around his neck, sparking a lot of questions on social media.
Okay, so here's what we know right now. 21-year-old Javion McGee was a truck driver from the Chicago area who was found in a rural area off Van Gogh Mill Road, not far from his truck. The sheriff says he was found with his back against a tree with a rope around his neck. The incident raising concerns from his family back in Chicago, who are now on their way here to North Carolina. The sheriff says he did not see any signs of foul play, but also would not call this a suicide. He now says the SBI is part of the investigation. The sheriff's message for those with questions today: be patient. Don't jump to conclusions.
I understand there's over 1,000 hits on TikTok. The sheriff's office not being transparent, not providing information to the family, and that is not true. There's been information put out there that there's a lynching in Vance County. There is not a lynching in Vance County. The young man was not dangling from a tree. He was not swinging from a tree. The rope was wrapped around his neck. It was not a noose. It was not a knot in the rope. So therefore, it was not a lynching here in Vance County.
Okay, so the sheriff says this was not a lynching. He goes on to say McGee did not appear to be disfigured. The medical examiner's office now conducting an autopsy. That's going to happen today.
Meantime, the FDA.
So if it wasn't a lynching, what happened to Javion? Why was the rope, so strategically placed? Does it matter that it's not an army knot, a fishing knot? This rope is around his neck. What was the cause of death? Was there any bodily trauma? He said there was no bruises, but we need more information. Don't keep saying be patient when this is, our loved ones that's going missing. We need answers, and you need to give it to us. Also explain why you guys aren't allowing the family to see the body. An autopsy is scheduled today. Who authorized that? It's so many questions we need answers to. And I don't like how he just haphazardly oh, this isn't that. This is not what happened. This and that. It's a lack of care. I don't like it. We need justice for Javion. Tell us what we need to know.
More tonight about a death investigation in Hattiesburg after a body was found near Timms Elementary earlier today. We're told an 18-year-old male was found dead near the intersection of Jamestown Road and Hillendale Drive on Tuesday morning. We do know that he was a former student of PCS, according to the school's director of communications. Hattiesburg police also say foul play is not suspected and that there was not a threat to the surrounding community. Forest County Coroner Lisa Clem tells us an autopsy has been scheduled for Wednesday morning at the State Crime Lab in Biloxi to determine a cause of death.
If you was born 1960 and earlier, you partially responsible for our current conditions we're subjugated to. By your dereliction of duty of meeting this on the front lines. Then the line went behind you and landed at your great-great-grandchildren's front door. Now we on the home front, and we gotta hold the line. Understand that. We gotta hold that line. Understand nations of people looking down on you, indigenous black man. No one can look up to you when you on your knees, begging for things you ain't gonna get. Understand the game that's being played right before you. Get an overstanding of the hands that's moving the game pieces on the Masonic floor. Get an inner standing of how they're using you. Get an understanding of what's supporting the Masonic checkerboard floor on the backs of the people. So when you learn our story, you can identify the lies in his story. You can do 3 things to his story. You can change it, you can make it, but you'll never repeat it. For the tools being played in the game, you know you're going to be played. Okay? Prince Hall Masons, Eastern Stars, in the ignorance of the people that the game's being played on their backs. When you're tired, all you got to do is stand up, and then the game's over. Then the game's over. Stop playing games with your life in these streets. Stop playing games with your children's lives in these streets. Understanding there's a war going on outside. And you must move strategically in these streets. Understand that. And for those who ain't willing to learn our story, no one can help you. But for those who determine to learn our story, no one can stop you. Understand? Be that change that you want to see. And to make that change, one must have an evolution before you can have a revolution. You gotta have a 180-degree corrective change in yourself. Emancipate your colonialist ideology. Cleanse yourself from this Masonic falsehoods of religious schools of thought. Detoxify your body from all them poisons they've been giving you. Then the change will begin. Understand that a people will only treat you the way you allow them to treat you. Let me say it again. A people will only treat you the way you allow them to treat you. Let that take residency in your cerebral cortex. Okay? You're at the point of no return. All right? You either going to learn from yesterday, make the change today for a better tomorrow. Those who refuse to make the change today, you ain't got to worry about tomorrow because you ain't going to be here. Okay? Let's practice self-preservation. Self-preservation. Okay? It's your God-given right to defend yourself in these streets. Okay? It's what you do. In conclusion, I'm going to send positive energy and blessings to all my indigenous people. I'm going to leave you in the manner in which I came, with a universal prayer. In the name of the universal creator of heaven and earth and everything in between, please bless my listeners, their families, their friends, and your true believers for when the day of reckoning takes place. For universal creator, you are all wise and all knowing, and unto you we all shall return. But until then, we give you the praise and glory that's due to you from this life into the hereafter. In the name of the universal creator of heaven and earth and everything in between, in your name we pray that this shall be done. So again, be that change that you want to be. Correct your mentality and practice self-preservation. Again, we'll let you like and share. Reach one, teach one. Peace, and take care.